All right, welcome to the show. And today we're going to be discussing the trial.
Yeah, I realized my heading, the
Yes.
trial.
So the riot has happened. Ed Gorsuch is dead. His son Dickinson and his nephew Dr. Pierce are severely wounded. Noah Burley, John and George Hammond, and Nelson Ford, the four men who escaped from Gorsuch's farm, are gone, presumably in Canada, and off to live a free life. William Parker and his little crew has made it safely to Canada as well. His wife Eliza has not made it there yet. And as we talked about, posses from both the local, state, and federal levels are combing Lancaster County, just arresting like every black person they see and just generally wreaking havoc. So things are not going great. The white neighbors and riot observers, I guess, Castner Hanway and Elijah Lewis, turned themselves in to the authorities because they knew that if the posses got a hold of them, something bad might happen.
Yeah.
So they decided it was safer to just turn themselves in. And now we're getting ready to get started on some hearings and some trials.
And the trial is that's kind of what makes this whole thing significant, right?
Yes.
I mean, all this crazy stuff happened, but crazy stuff like that happened. It was not none of it was particularly unique.
Yeah.
It was, but it's the trial that makes it a historically significant thing.
Right. So we'll get into it. The last episode, our next episode and our last episode, we'll do some kind of wrapping up everything, where are they now, summary type stuff. And basically what it is that this trial was a challenge to the brand new Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And the fact that the Fugitive Slave Act couldn't stand up in court is the reason that this is significant. It was one of the things that led to the Civil War, was the proof that you couldn't compromise your way out of the slavery question. Right. And, I think everybody kind of knew that, but it needed to be challenged in court first. And this was that court challenge. So the white people of Lancaster County saw Lewis and Hanway as the leaders of the riot and expressed more rage and anger towards them than they did towards anybody else, the men who had escaped or any other rioters.
Because they were like, you're white, you should know better.
Yeah, you're right. Well, they said you're white, so clearly you were in charge.
Right.
This was you did this. The posses had captured a bunch of people. They had them in Christiana that weekend following the riot, and had them giving testimonies. And then after those testimonies wrapped in Christiana, the case moved to Lancaster City, where the federal prosecutors were preparing their treason trial, the treason case. Klein testified, trying to put down rumors that he had led Gorsuch into danger and abandoned him.
Okay.
Klein testified that Lewis and Hanway were actors, but not leaders. And he put additional blame on the third white guy, Joseph Scarlett. None of the three white men were yet described as organizers, at least not in court, until Dr. Pierce gave his testimony. And I think he had to give his testimony from a doctor's bed. He was the one that got clubbed in the head a whole bunch and had headaches for the rest of his life. So he suggested to the court that Hanway had inspired the resistance. And people liked that because in Pierce's version, it blamed somebody that they actually had in custody. If they were blaming it on Parker, Parker was long gone. So people were like, oh yeah, let's blame the guy that we have. So that was a popular version of the story. So Klein changed his story, and from then on, it would more closely resemble the testimony that Pierce gave. He's like, yeah, actually, I know I said that they weren't leaders, but actually they were.
But now that I think about it again,
yeah,
that guy we have everybody's mad at, he did it.
Yeah, he did it. Don't think too hard about how I led them into danger and then ran away and hid. Let's blame it all on Hanway. So Lancaster court records at the time. So just a little bit of background. Lancaster court records at the time actually show that the law was surprisingly evenly applied between white people and black people in the same class.
Okay.
As long as violence didn't cross class lines or gender lines, it was actually pretty fair. I'm sorry, I didn't do my sources, but the main source, the Bloody Dawn by Thomas Slaughter, he gets into kind of some of the court records of Lancaster at the time. And you see there was this case and that case. And it seems like the judgments for black defendants and white defendants were like pretty even, more even and more fair than you would imagine. As long as
what if crimes cross racial lines? Like,
so that's the thing. Like, so if they stayed within class, like if a poor white guy and a poor black guy got into like a fist fight,
they'd get a fairly even-handed judgment.
Because people just generally didn't care about like the lower class in general. But if like a lower class person like beat up a middle class person or like did something to a woman, then you start to see the racial disparity.
Right.
Like a lower class white guy that like beat up a middle class white guy is going to get in less trouble than a lower class black guy that beat up a middle class white guy. But as long as you like kept it within your class,
as long as no one cared about the victim.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, basically all black people were working or lower class, and the courts just didn't care about those classes no matter what their race was. Surprisingly enough. So that would change, obviously. But
so the flip side of it is anyone could pretty much commit a crime against any black person with impunity.
Yes. Yeah, and that was the case throughout like most of American history and up until like present day in a lot of cases. But looking at those court records between 1834 and 1853, riot complaints tripled in Lancaster courts. There were 73 riot complaints in that time, and only 3 resulted in conviction, which is only a 4% conviction rate. So everybody was just accusing everybody of starting riots, but only 4% of the time did the court actually deem it to be a riot. Looking at like previous years, like during the 1700s, it was riot cases had a 25% conviction rate. And in the 1800 to 1813, there was a 31% conviction rate. So there was this weird period of time where there was a lot more riot trials, but most of them were frivolous. They think that, it was probably more frequent news reporting on rioting led to more people reporting riots and increased fear of riots and people being less likely to ignore, what they might deem to be a riot. They also, at that time, Lancaster started to classify any like interclass brawls as riots. So if there was like a fight between like a bunch of working class guys and a bunch of middle class guys, it was a riot.
Okay.
Where once again, if it was just a fight between a bunch of working class guys, no one gave a shit. But then as we have seen, we'll in our warm up episodes that we'll release a little bit later, this was also just what some historians describe as as America's greatest sustained plague of rioting. This was just a super riotous time in the United States. So in this time period, in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, there was the New York anti-abolition riot of 1834, the Astor Place riot of 1849, Baltimore's nunnery riot of 1839.
Well, I don't know about that riot.
I don't know much about that one specifically, but that wasn't that uncommon of a thing.
Nunneries?
Yeah, rioting? Well, so basically it was like hatred of Catholics.
Yeah, that makes sense. There was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment.
And I know like the one that I know about happened up in Boston, but I think it was all pretty much the same thing where anti-Catholic sentiment would like whip people into a frenzy and they would start to like spread rumors about nuns like doing weird, creepy things in their nunneries.
Eating babies or whatever. Yeah.
And then they would go and like burn down the nunnery. Like that was just a thing that happened. So yeah, there was also race riots in Philadelphia in August of 1834, the destruction of Pennsylvania Hall by an anti-abolition mob in 1838, Philadelphia nativist riots in 1844. So there's just riots all over the place at this time. Another major change was classifying an act as a riot if when the target was property, not people.
Oh, okay.
So prior to this, like the 1830s, if you could get charged with a riot if you like if you like attacked a group of people, like if you're some kind of crazy like mob attacking people, you could be charged as for rioting. But then they changed the law where if it was destruction of property, if you're going around like smashing windows and stuff, kind of our modern version of a riot.
Yeah, that's how I think of a riot.
Yeah, this is kind of when they started viewing that as a riot. Prior to that, it was mostly violence against people could be a riot, but smashing windows and, I guess they didn't have cars. I was about to say flipping over cars, but
flipping over horses.
Yeah, flipping over carts. That was just, I don't know, angry people being angry. So that was a major change that would lead to more riot cases. And people were also charged for riot for things that were not riots because it enabled the cops to demand a large bond for good behavior as a way of like social control.
Okay.
Yeah. So one riot in particular that I just wanted to touch on real quick that happened in that time period were the Columbia race riots of 1834 and 1835. Because that was also in Lancaster County, Christiana is in Lancaster County. So it's, nearby riots to the one that we've been discussing. The Columbia race riots were a series of working class riots where a bunch of working class white people targeted middle class black people. Okay. So it kind of went the other way. Columbia had a growing middle class black population, and
that makes people mad.
Well, and what's crazy is that during the first months of the riots, because they would like happen periodically over the course of months, the working class people would have these like meetings, and they would specifically say in those meetings that they were like mad that black people had more like they weren't pretending there was another reason that they were mad.
Yeah, they didn't like drum up charges. They were like, they weren't like, that guy was like whistling at white women. They were just like, that black guy has more money than I do.
Yeah.
And that's fucked up.
Yeah. And one of the quotes from one of those meetings is, there are those who wish the poor whites to amalgamate with the blacks. they were very like clear about the fact that what they were mad about was that there was black people in town that had more money than them. One of these riot committees decided to do a census of the black people in Columbia who owned property. And they went around and they asked all the black property owners in town if they would be willing to sell and leave town. And then the next night, if for any black property owner that said no, that they weren't willing to sell and leave town, the next night they went and like smashed up their house.
Oh, okay.
So they took like a pre-riot census.
That's weirdly organized for a riot.
Well, and that's the thing. Like that's one of the things I wanted to touch on with Columbia, just because it seems so weird. Like they were so open about what they were doing. They're like, we're mad that black people have more money than us, so we're going to go around and see which black people are willing to leave. And then we're going to target the ones that aren't willing to leave.
We're going to form a riot committee. Somebody's going to take minutes while we plan our riot.
Yeah. It's a very like weirdly organized riot. So basically they would just go around at night and they would like beat up black people and light houses on fire and break windows. And honestly, reading about it reminds me a lot of reading about pogroms in Europe. Like the descriptions of the violence and the descriptions of the way the mob moved through town targeting black people is like dead on accurate to like if you read about the way pogroms happened in like Russia, of like mobs moving through town attacking Jewish people. Like it's the exact same like force. It's the exact same.
It's a playbook that keeps coming up. Well, I mean, people kept doing it. Like what was it? Was it 1919? Was that what they call it? Red Summer?
Yeah.
That happened all over the country, like basically that exact thing. It like started with that, like, I don't know, this is a whole other topic, but just like briefly, it started with, there were some black people that were like protesting a public swimming pool being segregated by swimming in the swimming pool. And the cops showed up. And instead of like arresting them, they just like wouldn't let this one guy get out of the pool. Like every time he tried to get out, they would like club him back in, and they were throwing rocks at him until he drowned.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, a bunch of people that knew that guy got angry about it and started a little bit of a ruckus, and a bunch of them got arrested and sent to prison and stuff. And there was like a national outcry about like, it's America. People were mad about different things.
Yeah.
Some people were mad that like the police drowned that teenage boy. Mm-hmm. Some people were mad that like, the segregation thing seemed messed up. Like some people were mad that there wasn't a separate facility for the black people, but the majority of people seemed like they were mad that those black people got so angry
Right.
when the police drowned that boy, and that they weren't more like civil about it.
Yeah.
And it started this whole like nationwide like fervor of like basically that, just like the sort of like national sentiment was like, look, black people are starting to get like above their station basically. And like just like prosperous black communities all over the country, like businesses were burned, people were like run out of town. It just like happened everywhere. It was crazy.
And it's actually that is actually a really appropriate story to bring up, just because wrapping up the Columbia riot, like luckily in Columbia, nobody died. So that, you know, I don't know if there was like pogroms where nobody died. So maybe it's better than a pogrom in that way, but you know, luckily nobody died. But to just with what you were saying, the newspaper it's actually called the Columbia Spy. The Columbia Spy, the local newspaper, said of the riots that they were caused by black people's imprudence due to the foolish notion abolitionists put in their heads.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So it's exactly what you were just talking about, like, you know, a century earlier, where it's this people getting mad at the idea that black people don't want to like be subjugated.
Yeah. And it's like people get really riled up, and it happens time and time again, like all throughout history. Like people get in a, you know, building burning, like, you know, like rock throwing, like fury. And they're mad about like racial tensions.
Yeah.
And like, you know, that like people get mad when society feels unsettled.
Yes.
And sometimes people get really, really angry because racial tensions are mounting. And a lot of people go, well, it's their fault for thinking they can have like what we have. Like, they just shouldn't. They should stay where they belong. And then like everyone would be happy.
Yeah.
If they were happy in like a subservient place in society, we wouldn't have a problem.
Yep.
Like, and that makes sense to them.
Yes. So in Colombia, 9 white men out of the 50 plus who participated were arrested. They were all found innocent, and nobody was ever held legally responsible. So that's kind of where we're at. Like, riots are happening across the country. A big riot had just happened, you know, on the other side of Lancaster County. People are in a riotous mood. And so people are really amped up for this trial. And abolitionists see it as their opportunity to challenge the Fugitive Slave Act in court and in the newspapers. They know that this is going to get a lot of attention, and they want this to be a moment that they can publicly challenge the law, a moment that they can, you know, show in court that this is an unfair, unjust, ungovernable law. And so because they know that the, you know, newspapers are going to be primed, they're going to be covering this, they want the best like lawyer that they can get to represent the rioters, the defendants. And they're able to get Thaddeus Stevens, who is a congressman at the moment.
Yeah,
so
I've heard of that guy.
So they get a sitting congressman to be the chief defense attorney for the rioters. Thaddeus Stevens was born in Vermont in 1792. He had a club foot, and he had a brother who had 2 club feet, and then 2 other brothers who had no disability.
A lot of people used to have club feet.
Well, so the locals in Vermont saw the fact that they had 2 clubfoot children as a sign that his parents had committed some kind of secret sin.
Yeah.
They saw it as like punishment.
Yeah.
So he, you know, obviously not to the same degree as like black people were discriminated against, but he grew up
he had some empathy about, you know, people being treated shitty because of the way they were born.
Yeah. And then his father abandoned the family. His mother continued trying to run their farm by herself. It was obviously hard for her, and she was determined to make sure that her kids had a better life. So she did the thing that parents in the 1700s had to do, or I guess at this point it's the 1800s, where she picked her like smartest kid and sent him to school, and that was Thaddeus.
Right.
So she put him through school. He excelled. He was very smart. Graduated from University of Vermont, and then a former classmate offered him a teaching position in York, Pennsylvania. So he moved to Pennsylvania and spent the rest of his life living and working in Pennsylvania. After getting this job at the York Academy, he continued to study law and passed the bar, became a lawyer, 1816 was when he officially became a lawyer. And then he's like an important enough figure that we could do like a whole podcast on him. So just to like yada yada his like entire career. He became a very successful lawyer, became a congressman.
Yada yada congressman.
Yeah. Eventually, after all this, he would be a member of Lincoln's cabinet. A very successful person.
That's how I know his name.
Yeah.
Is a member of Lincoln's cabinet.
Yeah. So over this start of his career, though, like he wasn't a big abolitionist when he first got into law in 1816. But over time, practicing law and getting to know people and just being the kind of person who thinks deeply about things, he became more and more passionately devoted to abolition. And it became like a primary cause for him. Like the two things that he really cared a lot about were education reform and abolition. Growing up as a kid whose parents could only afford to send one of their children to school and being, discriminated against because of his foot, he grew up to care a lot about like ending discrimination and making sure that people could go to school.
Yeah.
To the point where he was called his nickname, I didn't know his nicknames, but his nicknames were either the Old Commoner or the Great Commoner.
Huh.
So he was known as a champion for the common man. He volunteered for the defense team because, like I said, they viewed this as like a great case to get publicity against the Fugitive Slave Act. And at these initial hearings, these like pre-trial hearings, he poked holes in Klein's testimony, forced Klein to admit that he was hiding when everything happened, and asked him what he had witnessed and how he pieced, basically asked him what he witnessed versus what he pieced together from the sounds he heard while he was hiding. Yeah. He's like, now, did you see that or did you hear it and guess because you were hiding in a cornfield?
Like a little babe.
Yeah. He asked Klein why his story changed and how he could ID people so precisely if he only saw them briefly on a foggy morning and had not met them previously. At this hearing as well, the prosecutor,
was my cousin Vinny type stuff. Yeah.
Yep. So at this hearing, and then remember, this is all pre-trial. So this is like when they're just taking testimony. At this hearing, Harvey Scott, a local black man who was a bystander to witness to the riot, kind of served as the prosecution's other main witness other than Klein. He confirmed every aspect of Klein's story. He agreed with everything Klein had said, and he provided names. He said that a man named John Morgan, Henry Sims, and William Brown were there, that Sims was the one who shot Gorsuch, Morgan was the one who slashed him with a corn cutter, and Brown had a gun, was just there with a gun, and that Hanway was just kind of walking around, like observing things. Multiple defense witnesses testified that Hanway was shouting, "Boys don't shoot," trying to calm down the crowd and avoid violence. Defense witnesses testified that Lewis tried to save Pierce, and that John Morgan, the one that Harvey Scott said had actually, or the one that he had said had slashed him with a corn cutter, was not there. That he was miles away at the time of the.
Oh, okay.
So, they testified that John Morgan was miles away and that Klein, when Klein finally made it to a tavern after the riot, Morgan was out front loading coal. So basically Klein was just like, it was the first black guy that Klein saw. So he was like, it was him.
He's the slasher.
Yeah, it was like the first black guy he saw after he escaped from the riot. Another defense witness also testified that Harvey Scott himself was not actually there. That, the supposed bystander was locked in a room during the time of the riot.
How was he locked in a room?
John Carr, who's a local blacksmith, said that at the time of the riot, Scott was locked from the outside in his bedroom at Carr's house. Carr claimed that the lock on the bedroom door was on the outside because Scott had to pass through his granddaughter's room to get to his own. So basically, because he didn't want this black man walking through his granddaughter's room, he would go into his room at night and he would lock him in, and then he would come in the morning and let him back out.
Oh, okay.
So that during the riot, he was locked in his bedroom to keep him away from this guy's granddaughter. And that once released, Scott spent the whole day working for Carr. actually, that's a side story. I shouldn't get into that actually, but just something just occurred to me that big county park out there, Wolf's Hollow County Park, that was the Carr property.
Oh.
And that's the same like part of the county.
Oh,
so
that's where that man was locked in his bedroom.
Yeah, it might be the same family there. Anyway, so the conflicting testimony was a problem for the prosecution, and the only black male rioters that they could ID with certainty were the Parker and his friends who got away. Eliza Parker, Hannah Pickney, and the three white men, Lewis, Hanway, and Scarlett, were the only readily identifiable suspects in custody. The prosecution then released the two women with prior to indictments and gave no reason. They just let them go for probably like some kind of like sexist reason, but in this case, sexism worked out well. Yeah. So Eliza Parker and Hannah Pickney get let go. They file no charges against them. They didn't return them to slavery. Even though, within Eliza's case, she was known to be an escaped slave, so they definitely could have returned her to slavery.
And she made it to Canada, right?
Yeah. 6 witnesses could testify that Eliza had been the one that summoned the rioters with the horn. But for no reason given,
she had that badass like horn stand in the window. She was dodging bullets and blowing her horn.
So yeah, and then they let her go, and she made it up to Canada.
Nice.
And we'll talk a little bit more about her and William in the next episode about what happened to them after all this. But yeah, it's a weird ending to Eliza's like role in the riot where they just let her go, and there's no like it just doesn't make any sense, honestly. Like you would think at the very least they would return her to slavery, but they're just like, no, go ahead, get out of here.
Like she's been through a lot.
Yeah, so yeah, good for Eliza.
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe she had some like secret dirt on them or something.
Yeah, maybe.
I have no idea. All the while, Southerners were getting increasingly angry over the riot. The mutilation that they made up about what happened to Gorsuch, the supposed genital mutilation that happened to him after that was like a key part of their anger, and they would talk about it more and more and get themselves more and more angry about it. There's no records to support that mutilation happened. The coroner's report only mentions one bullet wound and a incision on the head from the corn cutter, and then a bunch of like blunt force trauma. But there's this like Southern fear about a white man getting killed by black women and having his genitals mutilated. So they just like that. They were just obsessed with that and just getting like more and more angry about it. And so they started putting a lot of pressure on the governor of Maryland, E. Lewis Lowe, to do something to bring the rioters to justice. There was calls to cease commerce between the North and the South, for Southern students to withdraw from Northern schools and return home. And Lowe started to worry about vigilantes and a border war. He tried to explain to President Fillmore that, this was serious and that it was an attack on anyone who shared Gorsuch's worldview. Lowe saw it as fuel for the growing secession movement if it was not taken seriously. So Lowe was actually right. Like,
yeah,
he was not a good dude. He was, a Southern, a Southern governor, in the years leading up to the Civil War. But he was correct that if this wasn't taken seriously, this was going to add fuel to the secession fire. Lowe was not a radical, but he was dedicated to preserving the Union and preserving slavery, which was a moderate view in the South.
They're like, yeah, we want to keep the slaves, but we think the country's still a good idea.
Yeah, that was the moderate position.
They were willing to make a little bit of compromise.
Yeah. So Fillmore wanted Pennsylvania prosecutors to pursue. President Fillmore wanted Pennsylvania prosecutors to pursue rioters to the fullest extent of the law. At the same time, him and Secretary of State Daniel Webster wanted to distance themselves from the trial. They knew that no matter the outcome, a large number of Americans would be upset, so they didn't really want to have anything to do with it. They're like, there's no way everybody's going to be happy here. A bunch of people are going to be pissed off no matter what happens. So they needed to appear like to zealously pursue the law, but not be overzealous. They needed to figure out how to walk that line, and they didn't want it to appear as a show trial. So they appointed a federal attorney, John W. Ashmead, to prosecute the case, and he was instructed to pursue treason charges. Ashmead asked for advice and was told the president declines to advise or direct you.
Okay.
So he's like, yeah, we're not going to help you.
No comment.
Yep. It's also possible that Ashmead knew that, it's also possible that Ashmead had been looking to talk to the president to express his lack of confidence in the case because he knew that this treason charge was going to be a tough one to make stick. Governor Lowe, in the meanwhile, he directed Maryland's Attorney General Robert J. Brent to offer his services to the prosecution, and thought that if they had a Marylander, that's all right. Thought that if they had a Marylander on the prosecution team, it would help make Maryland less angry, I guess. So
it doesn't seem. I mean, it's an unpopular law to begin with. It's particularly unpopular in the state where they're having the trial.
Yeah.
And it just seems like all the people they're putting on trial had nothing to do with it.
Yes.
I don't understand why they went through with this. Like, why not wait for a better one?
Yeah. Because they were real mad. They thought that his genitals got mutilated and it made them really, really angry. Somebody made that up and it just made everybody really, really angry. So Ashmead did not want the help. He was upset about the idea that Brent would be on his team.
It was just like an ego thing.
Yeah, and so he told Brent that he would not be allowed to make closing arguments. That Ashmead himself would be the only one making closing arguments. Brent claimed that this was an insult to his honor and complained to Governor Lowe, who in turn complained to Fillmore. Fillmore and Webster directed Ashmead to allow Brent and Pennsylvania Senator James Cooper, who was also hired by Maryland, to make closing statements if they chose. Brent then leaked this whole incident to the press and made the prosecution look bad in the eyes of Northern readers and further complicated cooperation between the team. So right at the beginning, the prosecution team is like this very public infighting.
Yeah.
And they just don't like each other. So they don't have a lot of confidence in the case and they're fighting with each other and just generally looking bad in the press. Grand jury deliberations took 4 months while the accused and witnesses were held in Philadelphia's Moyamensing prison. I don't know how to say that. Moyamensing prison. So that was a weird thing that happened at this time where witnesses would also get held in jail. Yeah, witnesses would also have to go to jail.
Oh, that sucks.
Even voluntary witnesses had to go to jail.
I would never admit that I saw anything.
No, I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. So eventually they indicted 38 men, some of whom they'd never had in custody, on 117 separate counts of treason, the most Americans ever charged with treason in a single case.
How many was it?
38 men.
That's a lot of men.
38 men on 117 separate counts. Castner Hanway would be the first one tried, and the trial would be closely covered by the news, as I said, with pro-slavery publications focusing on the white leader on trial and abolitionist papers focusing on the white battle for black freedom. So even the abolitionists were kind of having this weird paternalistic racist view of it.
Well, that's hard to avoid.
Yep. That
tends to happen.
That's the time. Many viewed treason as the best charge because homicide and resistance to the law was beyond a riot, and that's what they claimed. Others viewed the prosecution as reaching beyond the evidence. Ashmead wanted the defendants tried separately and to face multiple trials to show the public that the federal government was doing as much as they could. And he also worried that a jury wouldn't sentence dozens of co-defendants to death if the evidence was weaker for some than it was for others. Right. So they decided they were going to do everybody separately with Hanway going first. One of the trials faced by the defendants was treason by written word, which was a remnant of English law. There is no evidence that the defendants had produced or distributed treasonous tracts. And not many, but some of the defendants were illiterate.
Right.
So there's this completely fabricated additional charge of treason of the written word. And the only reason that people think that they included that was to try to scare abolitionists.
Oh.
To be like, look, we can put you on treason for writing about how slaves are bad. We can put you on trial for even writing about abolition.
Yeah, that's not a bad tactic.
Yeah. So that was one of the additional charges they tried to sneak in there. For the defense, I already mentioned that the abolitionists were pooling resources and sparing no expense for the best legal talent. And that led to, Thaddeus Stevens being their lawyer. U.S. Marshal Anthony E. Roberts was the one who was tasked with assembling the jury, which was not an easy task at the time. Like, in Lancaster County or in southeastern, I guess it's Philadelphia at this point, but in southeastern Pennsylvania, this was a big news story. Everybody had strong opinions. It wasn't an easy jury pool. But Anthony E. Roberts was also a political ally of Thaddeus Stevens, and Stevens was the one who got him his job as the U.S. Marshal. Oh. So that led predictably to rumors of corruption over the course of the trial, which, I can't necessarily fault the prosecution for feeling that way.
No, it's certainly like, at least, what do they say? Like the appearance of corruption.
Yeah. Yeah. Stevens got him his job, and now he's the one picking the jury for Stevens' trial. Ashmead went to DC for guidance, and his superiors made sure they were out of town or otherwise unavailable. So they're just hiding from him. Like, nobody wants anything to do with it.
The president won't talk about it.
Yeah, the Secretary of State's hiding from him.
The DA or whoever the hell is just hiding.
Yeah. So nobody wants anything to do with this trial. They're all just ghosting Ashmead. Ashmead also had a hard time getting the federal government to cover the expenses of preparing for the trial. They wouldn't pay for an artist to draw the scene of the riot. They wouldn't pay for consultants, and they wouldn't hire court reporters.
Okay.
So they're just
being real stingy.
Yeah, they're just leaving Ashmead out there completely on his own. To make matters worse for Ashmead, 2 of the witnesses had escaped protective custody. Oh. Because imprisoning,
they lock up the witnesses.
Yeah, because imprisoning witnesses is a bad idea.
Imprisoning the witnesses, it just seems like that's not conducive to having the witnesses have good feelings about the prosecution.
No. Well, the defense witnesses were in prison too.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, if you're the authorities are the ones imprisoning you.
Yeah.
If you're I'll testify against those dudes. They did something pretty bad. Mm-hmm. I'll step forward and do what's right, like a good citizen should. Yeah. And then the state is all right, well, you're going to have to stay in jail for months.
Yeah. This is 19th century jail.
Yeah.
This is modern jail isn't good, but this is an order of magnitude worse.
I feel like you sit in your squalid hellhole, pooping in a bucket for 3 months. And then you're you know what? I didn't see shit.
Yeah. So yeah, 2 of the guys escaped. I lost my spot here. It appears the guards were paid to let them escape, but who paid the guards is a mystery. People in the South thought that Northern guards, marshals, jurors, judges, and witnesses were all closet abolitionists and corrupted by abolitionist money.
Deep state.
Yep. The 2 escaped witnesses were Josephus Washington and John Clark. They were voluntary witnesses being paid $1.25 a day. And they were to testify that there was a pre-existing conspiracy and that they were in possession of a note warning of the posse's arrival and telling local African Americans to arm for battle, which had no specific info on Castner Hanway.
Wait, who told them to do that?
They volunteered.
But who was paying them?
Oh, I guess the state.
They just
yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah,
is that still a thing?
Well, no. So they were that was they're I don't because they were imprisoned. So your family doesn't go hungry while you're sitting in jail waiting for the trial. So you sit in jail for 4 months while the grand jury does their thing, and we pay you $1.25 a day so that your wife and kids can buy bread.
Okay, that's not a great system, but it's not like the state was just hey, if anybody will testify against these people, we'll give you money.
Yeah,
it wasn't that.
No, it's possible that I don't know. I don't know what their financial situation was. It's possible it was a more steady income than they would have outside of witness jail. Maybe it was because we're talking, this is October, November, that time frame.
So they're agricultural workers.
Yeah.
I guess in this region, they're still wrapping up orchard harvesting and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was just it's possible. But it's that thing that they were the conspiracy that they were going to testify against about, that they were in possession of a note warning the posse's arrival and telling local African Americans to arm for battle. That's going to come up again later. That's like one of the specific charges that the prosecution is unable to make stick. That this was like a planned thing. Right. That they were like prepared. That they were waiting for this fight. Southerners were also upset that the prison officials and Marshal Roberts shared Thanksgiving dinner with the prisoners. Oh. So Castner Hanway's wife served as hostess, and the three white men, Hanway, Scarlett, and Lewis, dined with the officials. The mayor of Philadelphia joined them for dessert. They had 6 turkeys and a 16-pound pound cake. Wow. Yes, it's a lot. And on all the appropriate fixings. Mrs. Hanway had plates made up and sent back to the black prisoners held for the treason trial, and there was still enough left over to serve the rest of the prisoners in the corridor. So Mrs. Hanway brought a lot of food, and they had a nice little Thanksgiving with the trial officials, which made Southerners very angry. In the meantime, no one in Philadelphia invited the Southern prosecutors to Thanksgiving. Aww. They had a sad Thanksgiving by themselves. So they were all angry about Thanksgiving. The rioters were becoming celebrities, and every detail was reported on. Castner Hanway's trial began at 11 a.m. on Monday, November 24th, 1851. The first day of trial was delayed by a bird getting into the courtroom that was captured with great difficulty. For
how long?
Like a while, 30 minutes or so.
I feel like you could just ignore the bird.
Yeah, I don't know. They chased the bird all around for a while. So there was no, like I said, because every detail was getting reported in the paper. So the paper reported that there was like this delay in the trial while everybody tried to chase this bird.
A bird pooping on people. And...
yeah, so they had to chase the bird around for a while.
Leave a window open or something.
Yeah, it's November. Yeah. It was cold. Additional U.S. Marshals were brought in to keep the crowd orderly, and every space was filled with the courtroom filled to capacity. About 70 to 80 people was the courtroom's capacity. On day one, no black people were in attendance, and Hanway's wife was the only woman. The number of people wishing to attend grew each day, and the marshals were no longer able to segregate out women, to the horror of Southern papers. They're like, there's women in the audience. They hated the idea that women could attend a trial. By week 2, people were lining up at 7 a.m. to gain entry to the trial, which began at 10. The majority of the crowd were now women sympathetic to Hanway. One such woman was Lucretia Mott, who attended sitting quietly with the black prisoners and working on her knitting. Lucretia Coffin Mott was an early feminist and an activist and a strong advocate for ending slavery. Based on my reading, I'm fairly sure that she's related to Owen Coffin, who was shot and eaten after the sinking of the Essex. Oh. I'm not entirely sure how closely related they were, but they were both from Nantucket. And looking into a little bit of like Nantucket genealogy, Tristram Coffin was an immigrant to Massachusetts from England. He in 1659 he led a group of investors that bought Nantucket for 30 pounds and 2 beaver hats. He became the most prominent citizen of the settlement, and a great number of his descendants became prominent throughout North American society, and many of them were involved in later history of Nantucket and around the country. Basically, genealogy shows that all notable Americans with root in Nantucket are somehow descendant of Tristram Coffin. Oh. So, I skipped over the fact. Lucretia Mott was originally from Nantucket. So, 2 Coffins from Nantucket, probably related.
The Coffins are always from Nantucket. Every time I come across a Coffin reading anywhere, they have ties to Nantucket. But I know somebody whose last name is Coffin and claims to have no family ties to Nantucket.
Really?
Yeah, the only non-Nantucket Coffin.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know. Lucretia Mott was like a really awesome, badass, like feminist activist and abolitionist. Mm-hmm. And Owen Coffin was eaten in the story that inspired Moby Dick.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, they're interesting people, and I'm sure that they were related somehow. But anyway, so she was like, it was like a big deal that she was there. She was a celebrity at the time. So people were like, oh, Lucretia Mott's here.
She's knitting.
And she just like sat there quietly knitting because she's cool. Hanway arrived. Reporters were surprised that he wasn't dressed as a Quaker. because there had been false reports that he was a Quaker.
Okay.
So everybody was just surprised when he wasn't, like, I don't know, dressed like the Quaker Oats guy. Hanway never spoke in his defense or gave statements of his beliefs. So honestly, like, he might have been a Quaker. Nobody really knows. During jury selection, the defense seemed familiar with members of the pool and did not object to, like, anybody. They're like, yeah, we know all these guys. They're fine. They can all serve on the jury. The Southerners used up all of their objections and had to end up accepting 2 jurors that they felt likely supported Hanway. The papers also went on to report that the jurors' average age was 53 and that their average weight was 178 pounds.
Oh.
Which I found amusing.
A little older, probably a little on the heavier side for that era.
Well, there was a belief at the time that corpulence corresponded with success among jurors. So that's why the papers reported on their weight. They're like, oh, they're a little on the heavier side. They're going to be
They're like, oh, this is a good jury. It's a fat jury. That means it's good.
Yes, that was apparently the belief at the time. Okay. So they reported on the average weight of the jury. Associate Justice of the Supreme Court Robert G. Geer sat in judgment, and along with District Judge John K. Kane. Both men vowed to uphold the fugitive slave law till the last hour it remains in the books. The defense chose not to directly attack the Fugitive Slave Act, working to get Hanway acquitted rather than turn him into a martyr. Stevens dialed back his fiery speech, but he remained concerned about the effect that his reputation would have on the jury. The prosecution had the opposite problem, where Ashmead's speech was often described as dull. So the prosecution was boring and Stevens was a little bit too fiery.
Okay.
The opposite problems there. The prosecution cited the conviction of the Whiskey Rebels as the precedent and pointed out that Hanway arrived prior to most of the rioters and refused to help Klein. They also focused on the fact that Gorsuch had no weapon, which they just completely made up because he obviously absolutely had guns.
Yeah.
So they just lied. They're like, no, Klein was unarmed. He was a poor innocent man, got attacked.
They had a whole armed standoff. It was a whole thing.
Yeah, so they just lied. And like it was like a focus of their testimony that he was unarmed. Like, it was like a just bullshit lie that they made up was one of their like central arguments. The prosecution believed they had a strong case for a high misdemeanor, but the treason was much harder to prove. Under cross-examination, Klein admitted that he was hiding in a cornfield for much of the events, obscuring his view, but he denied cowering in the woods and claimed that he could ID many of the rioters by name. He also admitted to not knowing what Hanway said to the people before the riot and not seeing Gorsuch's body until after the violence ended. He also said that Hanway may have saved his life. Pierce admitted that he could not hear what Hanway said, but that he believed his presence alone inspired the dispirited people holed up in Parker's house, which is just wild speculation. They had no idea what was going on in that house. Pierce denied calling Klein a coward, and blaming the violence on him. Nathan Nelson was, I think it was Gorsuch's neighbor who joined in, denied saying that Klein hid in the woods, even after his own sworn deposition was read back to him saying that he saw Klein hiding in the woods. All the witnesses used the same language to describe Hanway's inspirational role, although none of them had heard what he said. They also testified about trumpet calls both inside and outside the house, calling people to riot, a written call to arms circulating amongst the black community, and Clyde told of the spy Samuel Lewis following him from Philadelphia to Lancaster. All this served as evidence of the conspiracy and treason. So like I said, those escaped witnesses who said they had like the piece of paper that said that they were warning the black community of the posse coming. That was their evidence of the conspiracy. The defense said that even if all this was true, how did it connect to Hanway? He's the one on trial. They're like, okay, that's great. But how does this have to do with Hanway? The judge ruled that it could still be relevant to Hanway committing treason and allowed the testimony. The defense would have to challenge the evidence and the defense would have to challenge the evidence and the judge's interpretation of treason to win the case. Theodore Culler, one of one of the guys working on the defense team, made the opening statement for the defense and expressed disgust that the prosecution thought the evidence pointed to high treason. He said that 3 harmless, non-resisting Quakers and 38 wretched, miserable, penniless Negroes armed with corn cutters, clubs, and a few muskets, and headed by a miller in a felt hat, without a coat, without arms, and mounted on a sorrel nag, levied war against the United States. Blessed be God that our Union survived the shock.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I liked it. He said that they were only there because Maryland thirsted for blood, which is absolutely true. The defense then told of the months of illegal kidnapping that inspired the black community to take up arms in their own defense. Stevens explained that there was a gang of professional kidnappers in Lancaster County. That would be the Gap Gang. Mm-hmm. And that on the morning of the riot, Hanway was told that they were targeting Parker. He argued that Hanway had been misinformed about the target. He argued that Hanway being misinformed about the target proved that he was not involved in a conspiracy, and that the illegal gangs operated in the area gave Hanway the right to ensure that the proceedings were legal. He also attacked Klein's character and held Hanway up as an honorable citizen. It came down to Hanway's word versus Klein's, and the jury should disregard the testimony from the lying lips of Marshall Klein. A judge, William D. Kelly, a separate judge, not a judge that was involved in this case, just a guy whose profession was a judge.
Okay.
William D. Kelly testified that he had heard much spoken of Marshall Klein, and much of it was very bad. A man named Francis Jobson testified that he had dealt with Klein multiple times a week for about 10 years and that his character was notoriously bad. William Frank knew Klein for 14 years and said that you should not believe what he said under oath. John Hinkle said that he had never heard a good thing about Klein in his life. Many others gave similar testimony to Klein's character. So they're just bringing out witness after witness that's just saying that Klein's
just a ton of negative character witnesses.
Yeah, just ripping Klein apart. Several testified that the black man Harvey Scott was miles away at the time of the riot. He was the one who was locked up in that guy's house to keep him away from his granddaughter, proving that Klein, and they were arguing that proved that Klein gave false testimony when he identified Scott from the riot scene. The defense,
or at the very least, proved that he was wrong in his assertion that he could accurately identify people like through the fog and whatever.
Yeah. So the defense established a pattern of one witness contradicting testimony from Klein, followed by another witness reminding the jury of Klein's poor character. So they just went back and forth. This guy,
he's a liar and he sucks.
Yeah. So next they called a series of witnesses testifying to Hanway's good character. Quaker Enoch Harlan testified that to his knowledge, Hanway was not a Quaker, which would attack the prosecution's theory that Hanway was connected to abolitionism through his Quakerism. The prosecution rebutted that Klein's many enemies were evidence of how boldly he had carried out his law enforcement duties. They brought in a series of witnesses who were mostly cops who testified to Klein's good reputation. They wanted to bring 70, but the judge stopped them because the testimony was all the same. They just got a bunch of cops.
A bunch of cops to like read a script.
Yes. They wanted to have 70 of them do it. And the judge was like, what's the point of this? They're all just going up there and saying the same thing. Like, stop it. They tried to downplay the existence of the illegal kidnapping gangs, claiming it was mostly legal slave catchers from Maryland. Then the prosecution put Harvey...
I'm still not 100% clear on the difference.
Well, one is legal and one's not. I mean, that's the difference.
Yeah, but I don't know. A kidnapper is I feel like kidnapping is the thing that should be illegal.
Right. Well, I guess the illegal kidnapping...
Like kidnapping without a license?
Well, I think it's, they would capture like free black people and return them to, or sell them into slavery was the difference. But
I feel like a lot of times that isn't like adjudicated until like after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a problem.
Yeah.
So the prosecution then put Harvey Scott on the stand, expecting him to confirm Klein's testimony that he had been at the riot. When asked, Scott shocked Ashmead by saying that he was not there. So Harvey Scott got on the stand and was like, yeah, actually, I wasn't there at the riot. Scott said that at first he told the truth, that he had been miles away, but he was taken in by law enforcement and frightened and said whatever they told him to say, which seems plausible.
Yeah.
So basically he got up there on the stand and said, like, yeah, I only said I was at the riot because the cops were going to beat me up. Which seems like the kind of thing they might do.
Yeah.
So Judge Greer ordered Scott to be released and paid for whatever he was owed, and so that he may not be tempted to steal. At first I thought that was just a judge being racist, that he was just like, oh, okay, we'll let this black guy go. We're not going to hold him in jail as a witness anymore. We better like pay him for his time that we held him so that he doesn't go out there to steal. I thought that was like a dig at him for being a black man, just 19th century racism. But it turns out that he was just kind of a thief. So he was their star witness, but in the years leading up to the trial, in the like decade and a half leading up to the trial, he basically just wandered around Lancaster and Chester County looking for temporary work and committing like petty theft. So he was like well known to the courts and well known to the people in the area as just like a shiftless vagrant who like wandered.
So he's like, because that's the thing where like, because cops have like, they have like paid informants and they're like confidential informants. And a lot of times that's like who those dudes are. They're just like, petty criminals. They have a relationship with the police primarily because they are petty criminals. Yeah. And that's how like they establish their role as like a regular, like, confidential informant, is they're like, see the cops all the time because they're getting arrested, and they're like, hey, I'll tell you about some stuff if you'll reduce my sentence or whatever. It seems like this is like a proto version of that.
Yeah, it is. Well, and so even the judge knew that he was like a petty thief. Like he's made that little dig at him and said like, make sure you pay him for his time here so that he's not tempted to steal. Yeah. Probably because he had appeared in front of that judge for theft charges before. Scott would die 8 years after the trial on the streets of Westchester of consumption.
Oh. People don't hardly ever die on the streets of Westchester anymore.
Yeah, I know.
Really cleaned up the town.
So one funny move that the defense cooked up in the trial were the 24 black men who were charged with treason all wore identical suits with red and blue ties. Oh. And the effect of that were the racist witnesses.
None of them could tell them apart.
Exactly. They couldn't tell them apart. So it messed up the testimony. Because remember, a lot of this testimony hinges on these people being able to confidently say who they saw where and when. And now like all the black people are dressed the same, and they can't point to them and say like, yes, he was like on this side of the field and he had a gun and he swung the corn cutter, because they are too racist to tell them apart when they're all wearing the same suit. And it just cracks me up that the defense team like thought of that. Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, they'll definitely not be able to tell these guys apart if they all wear the same color suit.
That is funny.
So it really, like, it was effective. It made their testimonies appear a lot weaker. Maryland Attorney General Brent was furious that Scott had turned on the prosecution and that Ashmead had botched the most important testimony of the trial. The prosecution then wanted to introduce testimony describing illegal black gangs in Lancaster, which doesn't really have anything to do with this trial. They think that was probably just a tactic to try to scare the jury back onto their side. Mm-hmm. Like they were basically just like wanted to start talking about like roving gangs of black people to try to scare the white jurors into like supporting them. It had nothing to do with the case. And I think the judge just told him, the defense objected to this new evidence being introduced, and the judge agreed and told him that this was nonsense.
Yeah, that's a tactic as old as time. Yeah. To just try and remind the jury that, like, criminals are scary and it's us against them. Yep. Yeah.
So 18 days after the trial began, Justice Greer said that the evidence supported the charges of riot and murder, but that Hanway was charged with treason, and he recommended that the jury acquit because the prosecution presented no evidence to support that charge. It took the jury less than 15 minutes to find Hanway not guilty. In January of 1852, the lawyers for the remaining defendants charged with rioting and murder being held in Philadelphia filed suit against Marshal Henry Klein for making false statements under oath. This indictment gave the lawyers some bargaining power. On January 16th, a settlement was made where neither the charges against Klein nor the charges against the remaining defendants would be prosecuted by the state, and the remaining Christiana prisoners were to be released and returned home. One last case relating to the Christiana riot was brought up in January of 1852. This time it was a federal case against Samuel Williams, the black abolitionist who followed Gorsuch's party to Christiana and warned the region about the kidnappers. According to his defense lawyer, the case against Williams was taken up merely to avoid the implication of imbecility after the government's loss in the treason case. Williams was charged with a federal misdemeanor for obstructing the fugitive slave law. This was the same punishment that Klein had threatened Elijah Lewis and Castner Hanway with when they failed to assist him. And Klein was called as the chief witness against Williams. And though the case was fairly straightforward from a legal perspective, Klein's tarnished reputation worked against him. The fatigued nature of the Christiana trials and the fact that one of Williams' defense lawyers was the son of the presiding judge, so more corruption, resulted in Williams being found not guilty. The Christiana riot ended with no one being held accountable for the death of Edward Gorsuch or in defiance of the fugitive slave law. And that was that.
All right. So no one goes to the hangman. Is that how they killed people then for treason?
Yeah, they would have hung them. Yeah. Yeah. So nobody was found. I mean, and the thing is, like, Gorsuch did get killed. Like, so, like, technically it was not a legal killing of that man. But they botched the case bad enough and they pursued the case against a non-involved party. And they just ruined the whole thing, basically. And so next week we'll talk a little bit about the implications of this and the implications of the riot and wrap up the story there.
That was America's biggest treason trial.
Yep, 38 people charged with treason. So thank you for listening and goodbye.